There we are. And so I will say over to Susan, who is our MC for the moment, and welcome. And Susan, if you want to introduce our speaker.
Thank you everyone for coming. Today we're delighted to have Josh Matlow, who's no stranger to Manor Road because he was our councillor for many years until the government changed that, but he keeps his interest up, and he's going to let us know what's happening and what we should be looking out for in terms of developments, the ever popular developments. So Josh.
Oh, thank you, and thanks for inviting me. Yeah, as we were discussing a little earlier on, I have a long-standing, very heartfelt relationship with your church. We've worked together very closely for many years, and in fact, a few years ago, when there was a discussion about what to do with what was the Christian Education Center, and should it be sold to a townhouse developer, or what should the future be? We worked together to support the community and make sure that we turned it into a park and a playground. And then I named the park for the creek that runs below the ground that, because it was sort of put into a pipe nobody knew about, but I wanted to bring Cudmore Creek back to people's awareness. So we named the park at your church for Cudmore Creek. And then Mona Piper Playground, I named the playground for Mona Piper, who was a beloved crossing guard for all the kids who go to Maurice Cody in the neighborhood. And you know how like a lot of parks are named for politicians and people with the so-called prominence in our society, but we forget about the people often who mean so much to our daily lives and to our families. And that's why Mona Piper, she was Toronto's longest standing crossing guard, and she really merited that recognition and that celebration. And I mean, what better, more appropriate way to celebrate a crossing guard who supported our kids by naming a playground for. So I just wanted to share a little history about the property really that you share and you abut when you go to church. But that was a success story because our area here in Midtown Toronto has so much development pressure. There's hardly a block, there's hardly a neighborhood that isn't affected by development. And the reason that it was so important that we work together as a city and a church to protect the green space at your property was because we need more green space. We need more parks. We need more places to come together. We need more places to sit and reflect and breathe. We need more places to play. And COVID has, I think, demonstrated that to us more than ever before, especially these days when, never mind not even being able to go to church in the same numbers as you are accustomed to, you can't go to movies, you can't go to theater, there's very little that you can do out in the world these days. But we are appreciating our parks more than ever. So that is a priority for me. That's a priority for our community, to make sure that while there is development pressure, that we fight to have a quality of life to serve both existing community residents and, frankly, those who will move into the new buildings in the future. The Yonge and Eglinton area many years ago, in the early 2000s, was designated as what is called an urban growth center by the province. And the reason that was done was for good reason. It, along with downtown and Etobicoke, Scarborough, North York, and other areas, were designated urban growth centers so that there could be more density in the urban core and less pressure on areas outside of our city, like the Oak Ridges Moraine and the Greenbelt, where we have watersheds and aquifers and wildlife corridors and prime agricultural lands that should not be eaten up by cookie cutter development. So that was the wisdom behind it. Where the government failed, I would submit to you, is that they didn't put anything in legislation to ensure that as we grew, that we could be certain that we would have the services and infrastructure in the park space to keep up with the pace of growth. So we've definitely got the growth. We've got a lot of growth, but we have not received our fair share of affordable childcare spaces, school capacity. If you ever try to get onto the subway in the morning or afternoon rush hours during normal times, you will know that it is very difficult, if not impossible, to squeeze onto the first, second, or even third train. And you're waiting on the platform. Along with concerns around water infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, recreation, and many other services that we rely on, along with parks that I mentioned before. So I led an effort called Midtown in Focus, and I moved a motion to council to create a process to look at what tools we have in the toolbox at the city level to set expectations for what and how our city should grow and our community should grow here in Midtown, to make sure that heritage, services, infrastructure, parks be part of the plan and the focus of the plan, and then see how development fits into that plan, rather than what has historically happened, which is that developers will propose their giant buildings and we have to react to that. So the way it works though in Ontario is that when the city has virtually any decision to make that is affected by provincial legislation, the province will have something to say about it. So Midtown in Focus went to the Minister of Municipal Affairs for his consideration, Minister Steve Clark, and he changed our plan. He doubled the heights of many of the buildings. He removed the necessity for much of the infrastructure and services that we put in there. And really concerningly, put the interests of the development industry before the interests of our community. And if you've seen what the government has done over the past year or two, you've seen a trend towards supporting the development industry, whether it be the ministerial zoning orders that have recently allowed for developments to be approved on environmentally sensitive watersheds, the destruction of heritage buildings like the Foundry downtown, the decision in the midst of a pandemic to not only not restrict the development industry like every other sector has been restricted or shut down, but in fact support their interests and even expand the construction noise hours rather, from earlier in the morning till later in the evening and Sundays, even Sundays and statutory holidays now. Which, again, makes one wonder, should it simply be how many donations a political party receives? Should that dictate what the public policy ends up being? I say no, but that's the way it is in Ontario today, and that should concern us. There are a number of developments that are being proposed and are being approved in our Midtown area. And what I do, along with many residents, is advocate, even within a system that's weighed towards the developer's interests, and a system that allows for appeals to go to a provincially appointed body. It used to be called the OMB. Now it's called the LPAP, but it's the same thing, that can override council decisions. What we do is, or at least we try to be creative within a bad system and figure out, okay, where can we get more parks? Where can we get more childcare? Where can we fight for a new school? How can we do this? And that's what we're doing. Whether it be the Canada Square development at Yonge and Eglinton, where we are, and I'm leading a process to make sure that our community's concerns and needs are the focus of the discussion rather than the developers. At 8 Brownlow at near Mount Pleasant and Sudan, where a developer wants to build another high-rise building on Sudan, and we want to see more park space there. And I could go through sort of unfortunately, the list is so long that we don't have enough time in the hour to go through it, about how many different developments are being proposed. You could look south to the Davisville apartment neighborhood, where it already is an intensified neighborhood, yet due to the provincial changes to our secondary plan, Midtown in Focus, developers are now trying to infill everywhere they can. So in other words, even the green spaces that are within the tall towers there, they now want to redevelop those green spaces and put more towers directly adjacent to other towers, where you've got these towers jammed together, the separation isn't wide enough, and you're losing the breathing space in between. Let alone ensuring that there are services like childcare and other services to support the new families and other individuals that are moving into the neighborhood. So that's our challenge. Now, in the midst of all the doom and gloom, I want to share a little bit about what we're doing so that you don't just walk away from this feeling, oh my gosh, what are they doing? Because a lot is being done. I moved a motion a few years ago to address the recreation needs in our community. And if any of you ever go to the North Toronto Community Center, you'll know that the swim lanes are typically overcrowded. It's a very busy place. And we need something in Midtown to serve our needs. So I moved a motion, and we've been putting together the funds to support a new community center at Davisville and Yonge. So while the school board is redeveloping the school, which is going to be ready for the kids this fall, over the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to be building a new community center adjacent to it, which is going to have a double gym for all sorts of programs. It's going to have a pool. So we're going to have a new aquatic center. It's going to have a community kitchen. It's going to have rooms for kids and seniors programs and everybody in between, within walking proximity of a really busy apartment neighborhood, along with the single family homes to the north. So on Sudan, we're working on creating what's called a green line or a greenway, where along the north side of Sudan, while that development pressure is there, we're trying to shove the developments a few meters back so that we can create a green line of different parks and playgrounds along the north side of Sudan, along with a childcare center that we were able to achieve closer to Holly. On Mount Pleasant itself, I've been working with the BIA on a plan to make Mount Pleasant safer, along with more beautiful. And one of the inspirations for the streetscape improvements that we intend to do there is the Mount Pleasant Cemetery itself. Mount Pleasant Cemetery is one of the greatest and largest arboretums in North America. You can find virtually any tree that is able to grow in our climate, you can find there. And what we want to do is reflect on that throughout Mount Pleasant so that we have wider sidewalks. We're going to look at different places where there can be safer crossings because it's such a wide avenue, and plant more trees and make it more beautiful so that it's just more walkable and more animated to create a streetscape that's just more enjoyable and safer to walk on. Trying to think of any other sort of kind of general issues to bring up with you. I mean, overall, this pandemic has been a challenge to our community and every other community. There is, I think, more of a stress on people's mental health. I think everyone has been traumatized by the experience, whether it be losing your business, losing somebody you love, or simply not being able to hug your parents or have your kids visit their grandparents. The long-term care homes in our community and the retirement homes, typically called congregate care settings, have been devastated. There were 60 or 70 deaths at the Meehan Manor residence at Davisville and Yonge. But the Britton House and many of the congregate care settings along Mount Pleasant have been affected as well. There have been deaths, there have been illnesses, there have been outbreaks. And seniors have really been hit harder than any other demographic, but they're not alone. And I'll conclude by my remarks, because I want to open up for some questions, by saying that I'm still very optimistic. It's clear that we're going to have a really difficult few weeks. The variances are in a race with the output of vaccine doses. And it's our job as a community to do everything we can defensively to keep our physical distance, wear masks when that's not possible, spend time outdoors, and regardless of what the province did, spend time outdoors. And I believe that recreation spaces outdoors should be used because it is safer to be outdoors than to congregate indoors. everybody needs to get outdoors right now. It's safer. And that's what evidence supports. That's what the experts advocate for. And get your shot. I also know that there's been a lot of confusion from the province, and I know that there's a confusion due to supply. What's a hotspot? Where is the hotspot? What postal code's in it today? What's in it tomorrow? Who's eligible? How old do you have to be? The reality is anyone who can should be trying to get one. And that's why I set up I call it a one-stop shop on my website, which is joshmatlow.ca. And if you go to /COVID-19, we are providing timely and accurate and easy to understand information about just who can get it and where you can go. And we're encouraging everybody to go out and get it because the sooner we're closer to herd immunity, the more people who are vaccinated and the fewer people who are catching the variances of COVID-19, the closer we will be to ending this pandemic. And I believe that we are going to do that over the coming months, but we need to do it as well as possible because the better we do it, it means the more people who will get to the finish line well and together. So I'm going to conclude on that note. And I just want to have a conversation with you rather than just make a speech and be guided by any questions or comments that you'd like to make. So I'll pass it back to you.
So I'm trying to remove your there we go. Remove your spotlight. And here we go. And gallery view. And I see Greg McKinnon's on this too. Wow. Okay. And we see, and Peter and Gary's there.
Gary's here. Gary's here.
Oh, you're hiding in the rocks, Gary.
Here I am.
Being funny. So I'm sure people have questions. Who wants to start? Lots of thought. Oh, Susan Johnson. Let's hear from you. And then we have Peter. Okay.
Hi, Susan.
There's several things. A friend of mine lives in one of the apartment buildings along Davisville. Actually, Herb is on Belial, but trying to get, you have all these high-rise buildings and what you're getting are wind tunnels. We've all felt it. And I'm wondering, is this ever taken in as a consideration? Like, I mean, I questioned the Value Mart group and they said, yes, we're going to address the infrastructure, but, for sewers and stuff like that, but, other impacts that it has. And I'm just, I think they're just looking at the dollar signs and not thinking of the impact on the community.
Yeah, I mean, there's truth in all of that. The reality is that when, so the planning process is completely prescribed by the provincial government. In other words, the city doesn't get a choice about what application it reviews and what is going to be considered. Everything that the city does is set out by the Planning Act, which is provincial legislation. That's one of the reasons, by the way, that I've been advocating for a city charter, because I strongly believe that the city of Toronto should actually have control over its own land use planning, like many cities in the United States, Europe, and elsewhere do. But when there is an application, and again, it can be a reasonable application or it can be completely out to lunch, greedy, but whatever it is circulated to all the different divisions of the city. So everyone from, everyone from forestry to planning to transportation to you name it, reviews it. Toronto Water, everybody, Toronto Hydro, everybody reviews it. It's also circulated to the utility companies, to the school board. It's widely circulated, first responders, etc. So it definitely gets, it goes through filters. So yes, shadowing, wind, all those things are considered. That's the good part. It doesn't mean, though, that if something has been determined to be of a concern, that will end up stopping the development. Because what the developer has the opportunity to do is go to what used to be called the OMB. Now it's called the LPAT, but it's a provincial appeals body that can disregard the council process and then approve it. And that's what often happens. So two things happen under this system. Either it is approved at council because we recognize, almost like a poker game, which should not be the way planning is done. but we recognize that if we weren't going to approve an admittedly imperfect proposal, it would go to the LPAT and be approved even worse, or it goes to the LPAT and it's approved worse. So in other words, it's either a less worse resolution or a really, really bad resolution. Now, sometimes there are better ones, and that has a lot to do with whether or not the developer is reasonable and willing to engage with our community, discuss things and try to arrive at a better place. But the system is set up in such a way that it's not about whether or not a development is going to be approved. It's almost predetermined that it is. It's about how do you mitigate the adverse impacts and how do you get good things into it so that it at least leaves our community better than they found it. And that's why we're always advocating for the things that I listed earlier, whether it be park space, setbacks, childcare, school capacity, infrastructure, etc. But it shouldn't be this way. And we need a provincial government that will put communities before the financial interests of developers first. And that just hasn't happened yet. So in Davisville, my greatest concern in Davisville, in the Davisville village, we're talking about the apartment neighborhood there, is that they're going to allow more and more infill developments that are going to be towers too close to other towers, that don't allow for the sun, that do create wind tunnels, that take away the breathing room, the existing green space that they do have today, but that there also won't be the services. When I say services, I don't mean just rhetorically. I mean like specifically. Davisville Public School, which is being redeveloped as we speak, even after it's redeveloped as a larger school, will still be at capacity in a few years. And then we'll still see those signs go up in front of the new condos saying, if you move in, your kids may not be able to go to the local school. That's bad planning. Same thing with childcare. Same thing with transit capacity. So we are always looking for ways to try to push the envelope on those things. But until the system is changed, you won't be successful with the ad hoc developments. And that's why I've been advocating for both each development to be better. But meanwhile, I've advocated for the abolishment of the Ontario Municipal Board, which we got a little closer to under the Wynne government. They made reforms. Doug Ford then brought back the powers of the OMB to the LPAT. But he also approved Bill 108, along with changing our Midtown and Focus plan that just basically gave the shop away to the development industry. And that is our big frustration, to be very candid with you.
Well,
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm
One
thinking
second.
I found it.
One second, Debbie. We have Peter first, and then you.
Sorry.
Okay.
Hi, Peter.
No problem. Okay, Peter, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Josh, for that explanation. That's a very frightening scenario, that a city the size of Toronto has no authority on how land is being used. That's unbelievable. I just want to comment on the what you said about the what's it called, community center just west of Yonge and Eglinton. I forget the name of it.
The North Toronto.
Right, I used to live in that neighborhood right on Roehampton, and I went there a couple of times, and the utilization is unbelievable,
Busy, yeah.
way over. So
Yeah.
I'm all for building what you're proposing at Davisville and Yonge.
Thank you.
It's long overdue. I mean, this was 10 years ago, and the utilization was way over the top there. So yeah, we need more centers or places where people can go, especially in situations like we have today, for sure.
Oh, thank you, and thanks for your supportive words. My family and I, we live here near Yonge and Eglinton. We live right in between Mount Pleasant and Eglinton and Yonge and Eglinton, and it's not even a matter of like being pro or anti-development. I find that to be a very sort of divisive and it's not a very thoughtful debate. It's a matter of that when development happens, it should fit into the character of a community. It should real things need to be considered, whether it be heritage preservation, whether it be the infrastructure to support the residents. In other words, toilets should be able to flush, electricity should be able to reach your home. There shouldn't be windows that face somebody else's window just a few meters away. There's got to be like good planning put into it. And social services, meaning childcare and schools and all these things that support a quality of life. Whether you have 2 people in a neighborhood or 2 million people, everybody should have those, I think, basic reasonable expectations. But the planning process doesn't lend to that. So we always have to fight and push and be creative about how we do things. It doesn't mean that the city has no say in it, and there is a process that we go through. But ultimately, as long as the province has the last say over our land use planning, our finances, our elections, as you saw what happened in 2018, then the city of Toronto will just remain sort of like a subservient arm of the province rather than a government onto its own right, reflecting the priorities of our local residents. And that's got to change. And I've been advocating for a city charter, and you'll hear more out of me this year about it, because I mean, look at how the pandemic has been managed. I believe, whether you like everything that our mayor and our medical officer of health has said or not, they have been more closely focused on science and evidence-based advice than has the premier. And right now, we would not have our basketball nets taped up if it wasn't for the province. The evidence is kids should be outside playing, breathing fresh air, because if they're not doing that, they're going to be hanging out with their friends indoors where viruses transmit. And anyway, I digress there, but there are so many reasons why the city should be empowered to be able to be reflective and responsible for its own residents.
I know Mayor Tory gets my vote next time again. Every time it's time to vote.
I'm sure you'd be happy to do
He's
that.
an amazing mayor.
And by the way, and I say this, by the way, as somebody who has famously had my jostles with him. We've had big arguments over the Scarborough subway and over, other things too. But I think, fair and objective people can criticize somebody or a government when they do the wrong thing, and admire and acknowledge and congratulate them when they do the right thing. And I think the mayor's conducted himself wonderfully throughout this pandemic.
Well,
And Debbie,
up in
you
our
had another
area-
question? So Debbie, you have another question?
No, that's okay.
Okay.
Thanks. That was kind of you to say about it.
Oh,
Okay.
my son lives on Lillian,
Oh yeah.
which is near, I think, Yonge and Eglinton.
Yes.
And, they keep there, I think, proposing more towers
Yes.
right in that area. And I'm thinking, like, doesn't leave the community any place, like parks and things.
Well, and that's
So
why
is that part of your area too?
it is indeed. And that's why Lillian and Sudan, which is the street directly south of Eglinton, that's what I was referring to earlier, where we're trying to have setbacks, sufficient setbacks, meaning breathing space between the sidewalk and the road and where the building ends, the property, so that there can be space for playgrounds, for people to sit on a bench and read a book, for just room, space, transition for everybody. And that's something that we have been successful with, and we're continuing to push for that space. If you go for a walk along Sudan, you will see that over the past few years, block by block by block, whether we're happy with the development itself, we've been successful at creating that space, and that's going to be good for everybody in our neighborhood.
Very good. One observation I've made is it seems when they're building towers, in amongst other towers, if it's, let's say, farther north from the lake, a little bit north, it becomes higher, so that you start off low at the lake and then you get higher and higher and higher. And I can see that happening from my window, as they're building more buildings, like it seems that they're getting higher and higher and higher. So it's like, I don't get it. Like, how can the city let that planning go on?
Well, I'll give you an example. In our area here in the Mount Pleasant and Eglinton area, the city's plan is to have the tallest towers at Yonge and Eglinton, and then transition incrementally down towards the neighborhoods. So in other words, tall towers at Yonge and Eglinton, and then they should become lower and lower and lower as they go into the neighborhoods. So a few years ago at Broadway and Redpath, this developer Pemberton proposed these massively tall towers that then sort of poke up taller than the other towers that were in between. They were approved at the Ontario Municipal Board, the appeals body that I mentioned earlier. What that does, though, is that sets a precedent for the next developer to say, well, if they got that, I should be able to get something just as tall. And then you lose control of the entire narrative because then they keep going back to the appeals body, and then precedent is their argument. And that's why you're seeing taller towers show up at places where the city wouldn't have put that into the plan. But they're getting there because they now have a legal argument to do so based on provincial policy.
So many questions. So related, you were talking about Mount Pleasant and greening. And so I've asked this in other contexts. In different parts of Toronto, think of George Street in the U of T. So a private citizen paid for the narrowing of that street. And I think if I'm not mistaken, on Wellington now at Church, I think they're narrowing the street to widen the sidewalk. Is there any, and that they've actually, and as you know, they've added many bike lanes all over the city. So in essence, narrowing the street. Is there any mindset yet to narrow Mount Pleasant to make it more pedestrian friendly and maybe add more green space and trees, or is that not on the radar yet?
So the plan that's been sort of drafted and divided between the city and the Mount Pleasant Village BIA is to not remove lanes from Mount Pleasant and not put bike lanes there, but certainly try to increase the sidewalk space so that there can be more of a pedestrian experience that's safer, that's more pleasurable, along with room to plant trees, the ones that I mentioned earlier, that will sort of, kind of bring the arboretum of the Mount Pleasant Cemetery out onto the sidewalk so that it's just more green and also from an age-friendly city perspective, it's important to provide more canopy for shade along with benches and so on. But Yonge Street is going to, as part of the Active TO and Cafe TO initiative, what that means in English is Active TO is the bike lanes and sort of the more active transportation initiatives. Cafe TO is the really successful initiative we did last year in response to the pandemic. While restaurants and cafes and bars are understandably restricted indoors due to virus transmission, it provides them a lifeline to be able to serve people outdoors where it's a lot safer. So it takes up like the parking lane or the curb lane and then allows for cafes. I'm sure you all saw that last summer. So we're doing that again this year. You're going to see those on Mount Pleasant as well. And on Yonge Street, we're going to use the lane for both uses. So in other words, there's going to be a bike lane on Yonge Street for the first time in its history, along with cafes. And it's going to be something that is going to be so lovely, in the midst of these trying times, to have a streetscape that people are being healthy and active on and being able to have a glass of wine with each other, and it'll be lovely. And it's proposed for May, but obviously we're having to monitor this race between the vaccine doses and the variances. But hopefully, at least by May, June, we'll see that roll out. And I think it's going to be really, really wonderful.
Sort of like Yonge and Shepherd?
Oh, I'm sorry. I should clarify that. So this phase is going to be between Bloor Street to connect with the Bloor bike lanes, and it's going to go up to Davisville.
Okay.
And the only reason it's not going north at this point is because Metrolinx still has their mess at Yonge and Eglinton, and there just isn't a safe way to go through that junction at this time.
So is the idea sort of like the way it is at Yonge and Shepherd where Mel Lassen Square is?
It's going to be like that. However, it's Yonge and the plan for Willowdale is a permanent plan. For Bloor to Davisville, it'll be a pilot. And then, of course, if successful, it could be approved as permanent, but it's going to be part of the active TO initiative right now. So it'll be sort of temporary bike lanes for now. And then proof will be in the pudding. I mean, if it's successful and if it's appreciated, then it should be on the table for being permanent. It also, I think, for those who fear bike lanes, I know it's still controversial for some, it'll demonstrate to them that maybe the sky didn't fall, like maybe it'll be successful. So I think it's a mature way to do it.
Well, you know, it'll encourage people, well, that live in the north, for example, to come down to Davisville. You know what I mean? If there's nice cafes and bike lanes, and you know, if it's more beefed up a bit, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you know, so that it's like geared for shoppers and pedestrians, and you know, like when you go downtown, it's not always nice to walk, you know. It's, yeah, it'll bring people to your area to go shopping. Or
Just to be clear, so the bike lanes will go from Bloor to Davisville. The cafe TO is going to be rolled out on retail strips throughout our city. So that'll go north. And the two things that I heard back last year, or four things. A, it brought a lifeline to the businesses. They were really grateful to have an opportunity to bring in a little revenue at a time that they've been restricted, and many of them have really struggled despite the government program. B, a lot of people in Toronto were just saying, well, in fact, we've been jealous of Europe for years. We love this patio culture. This is like, it just adds this like fun life to our streets. The third thing I heard was they could be more beautiful. They had just kind of orange cones and they kind of look like construction sites. So they could be prettier. And that's going to be something that we're going to do this year to make it a little nicer. And then safety. In other words, do it in a way that's buffered, in a way that if a car ever were, God forbid, to you know, maybe just not, maybe a driver isn't watching where they're going, that there'd be a little bit of a buffer there to make sure that we are proactive about safety. So that's all being addressed.
I think we have.
looked at- Oh,
One second, Susan. I think Joanne had a question.
okay.
Sorry.
Actually, it was about the extent of the bike lane on Young, so thanks for answering that, Josh.
You're welcome.
Over to you, Susan Logie. Okay.
Have you seen what Stratford did with sidewalk cafes last year?
No.
What they did was they put the sidewalk cafe where, okay, you have a restaurant and on each side, let's say there's a retail business. So the sidewalk cafe of the restaurant was on the sidewalk, and then they built boardwalks that attached to the sidewalk, so that you're walking in front of the retail store. I hope I'm describing this so you can imagine it.
Yeah.
On the sidewalk, and then you curve around the sidewalk cafe on the boardwalk. And then you come back to the sidewalk where there's a sidewalk cafe. There's this boardwalk, quote, sidewalk that had a rail, and that it was attractive. It was simple, although not as simple as cones and what have you. And it provided a buffer between the cars and the sidewalk cafe. It also meant that not the entire parking lane was pirated for sidewalk cafes, let's say. So it's like some parking, but not in front of where the actual cafes were. And then you could make your sidewalk cafe area was very unique to each restaurant. It really looked and worked super well. I thought it was better than what I saw on Young and on Mount Pleasant last year. Primarily because of that buffer. And I thought, I don't want to be eating and sucking gas fumes. At least if you had a car width, the parking lane was the boardwalk, basically, and not even as much of that. then
see.
it,
So you're
yeah.
saying you shifted the patios towards the retail and then created a walking space on the other side,
So
towards the
the
road.
restaurant is running the sidewalk cafe, right?
Yeah,
Last year, when I walked down Mount Pleasant, where I walk more frequently than I do Yonge Street,
Mhm.
because I live at Merton and Mount Pleasant, then you're dodging waiters, or waiters are dodging pedestrians.
Yeah.
So you have that issue with the layout of last year. And the other issue was, in spite of the concrete, whatever those stanchions or whatever they're called, between the sidewalk cafe and the street, the car traffic lanes, I too thought two things. What if a car, you've got a driver under the influence, or a driver not paying attention, or a driver whose attention is distracted by a screaming child or whatever, and they, you know, are these sidewalk cafe folks in danger? Could they be hurt? And then, so that Stratford thing, plus the second thing was, you're sitting there eating and drinking, and then there's cars and gas fumes, and you could maybe reach out, you couldn't quite reach out and touch them, but they're very close. So that whole concept of keeping the sidewalk traffic
I hear you.
closest to the car traffic was brilliant, I thought. And it also kept the sidewalk traffic away from the wait staff.
You know, I understand the arguments that you're making, and you piqued my curiosity. I will look into what they're doing in Stratford, and if I can bring any good ideas to the city, I will. And certainly, like, everything from beautification to safety, like, were things that I asked to be addressed, and I know that when it comes to parking as well, there's a lot of consultation with the BIEs themselves to make sure that all those different interests are considered as part of how this thing is laid out and designed. So that is being considered. But I'll look at Stratford, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pat.
We're gonna have to be
They
creative.
should make, they should
Hold-
make
hold-
Yonge
hold-
Street only two, like,
Hold on,
lanes.
Debbie. Hold on, Debbie. Pat Wordy had a question. 1 sec. Okay.
sorry.
Pat Wordy. Pat, you had a question. Had your hand up?
Can we go to the street?
Pardon me?
Can we go back to
Can we go back to what?
Lillian's?
Oh yeah, you can always circle back. Yeah. Okay.
Whatever you want.
Yeah. Can you
Yeah.
hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Generally, yeah. You go.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now?
Not now.
Lillian Street. Okay, Ship Lake. They did a fairly good job of we have a dog park, which it's great, but they haven't put a gate on it, so everyone can use it, which is not really the idea. It was just for the 3 apartments of Ship Lake. And so we get dogs barking at 12 o'clock at night sometimes, or 7 o'clock in the morning, and they're running around a pack.
So I think I picked up on Pat. Just if you can hear me, what you were saying was broken up a bit, but what I picked up from you is that and by the way, this, for those of you who don't live in the area here, Pat's referring to part of that space that I mentioned on Sudan on the north side. There's a green space that a lot of people are congregating with their dogs. The answer, Pat, is that that's not a formal dog park. So that's why there's no gates or anything. It's not a city dog park, off leash area. It's just been adopted by dog owners to be an area where they've decided to get together, because we got a lot of people who have dogs in our neighborhood, and they're always looking for places to go with their dogs. So that's why it's just never been, nothing's formally been done there. That being said, though, you know, if you want to speak with me offline and send me an email and we can have a chat, we could always try to engage Ship Lake in a conversation about, how to better maintain it in a way that considers, how the behavior there impacts other people. And I'd be happy to look into that for you and with you. But it's not a city off leash area, so that's why there's no rules, from the city about it.
With dogs.
With dogs, yeah.
These apartments and loads of dogs.
I was thinking that they
Good.
should actually close Yonge Street to traffic. You know what I mean? In certain areas like Davisville and Yonge Street.
So
Anyway.
downtown,
like-
actually, south of Dundas, that is
Uh-huh.
something that is being actively explored.
One second. I'm just going to suggest, Pat, if you can type your comment in the chat, we might not lose a thread of it. And meanwhile, you respond to Debbie. But type your comment in the chat. That'll be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, Pat, your voice was kind of breaking up a bit, but again, on this specific issue, like if you email me, Councillor_Matlow@toronto.ca, we'll follow up with you. And if there's something we can do to help.
Okay. Yeah, it's an issue. Yeah.
I hear
Okay.
you. I really
Thank
do.
you.
Get back to Yonge Street. So the
Yeah,
question,
I think they should be closing parts of Yonge Street to traffic.
I think Councillor Wong Tam in downtown has proposed that from
That's exactly
basically Queen to, is it Dundas?
Yeah, to Dundas Square.
Yeah, so
And,
that's, they're gonna,
and it's not the first time that's happened. Yonge Street actually many years ago used to be just like that. And then it was opened up again. But
it was a disaster back then, yeah, unfortunately.
yeah, well,
It became a red light district, yeah.
there were a lot of other problems at Yonge Street, and one of the challenges with that stretch of Yonge Street is that architecturally it was so insular. I mean, the side of the Eden Center had to be retrofitted because it was basically just one long wall that
Yes.
didn't interact with the street, and that was retrofitted several years ago so that it would actually interact with the streetscape. And this is, by the way, again, another reason why planning is so important to our quality of life. But I guess I'll conclude about, on the whole sort of how we use our public space note. I think this pandemic has presented so many challenges, but also a really, really wonderful opportunity for us if we're willing to look at a silver lining. We have been forced, all of us, no matter our political leanings or ideologies, we've all been forced to have to reimagine how to use our public space. And it provides us an opportunity to be imaginative, be creative, and to really look at how we can be more active, healthier, and have fun with each other in a way that we've never done before in our public spaces. I think it can contribute to our quality of life if, while we recognize pragmatically that cars will be here for a while, so we can't just pretend that that isn't going to be a reality. We also need to create more space for bicycles, for pedestrians, and for play and for active transportation and recreation. And that's what we're doing in Midtown Toronto. And I see this as a wonderful opportunity, and we're taking a lot of those steps right now.
Thank you, Josh. That's amazing. We could hear a lot of other ideas emerge, and I'm looking forward to perhaps you coming back again. And so Ashley, Susan, you want to say bid us thank you?
Thank you very much, Josh. And thank you for your continuing interest in our area, and especially your high profile communications. They're wonderful. And so next week we have Kelly Snow, who is going to continue talking about what we can do to help the environment, especially in these times when, this is plastic, but it doesn't go into the recycling bin sort of thing. So look forward to that. Thank you for coming.
May I just say a thank you back to you? First of all, say hi to Kelly for me, because he's amazing. And I want to thank you and your entire congregation. You have always been a voice, a progressive and thoughtful voice whenever there's been a challenge You have been the ones who stood up and said, how can I be helpful? How can I be compassionate? And I just have so much respect for you as individuals and as a community and a congregation. And I look forward to working with you and being with you many more times in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Take care, everybody.
You too.
Have a good
Thank
day.
you, Joseph and Susan,
Yes.
for organizing these meetings.